holy cow. I've just done the math, and yeah, I have 14 of Conrad Steyn's decks. And that's not even like all of Conrad Steyn's decks. It's just the absurdly, wonderfully large amount that I own. And if you're watching this video in September of 2023, the good news is, really good news, that this month, which is Conrad's birthday month, he is giving a gift to all of us by making all of his decks available free of charge on the Make Playing Cards website. We're in his stores on that website. So I've put the links to his two stores, Tarot Lounge and Luke, below. So what is it about these decks? You know, Con's decks first came into my awareness, as they did for many of us, through the CS Tarot. This was a deck, I'm trying to think when it came out, like a few years ago. And what distinguishes it, like all of his work, is this attention to historical detail. So, you know, this impeccable rendering of the line work of the original Coleman Smith Tarot. So the CS here is Coleman Smith. It's also, of course, Conrad Steyn. But then also this really wonderful design sense, this alertness to color and texture and pattern. So the first edition of the CS Tarot, and by the way, this is his, he has designed several tins that you can also get. He's got boxes for some of his cards. I prefer pouches usually for my decks, which I tend to make by taking an image from my own collection and putting it into creating a pouch to go with the deck. But what he did was he took the crackleback design, the sort of, this is another of his decks, but the traditional crackleback design of the original Pam A, and gave a kind of rendering of that relates it to, let me see if I can get the light a little better here, that relates the image to a kind of more like stone or gem work. Super beautiful, and it comes in different colors. So in his first edition, I got the I think he's calling this amber, but look at what he does, and this is familiar to a lot of us, right? A lot of us own this deck in one or more versions. This creation of backgrounds that complement the coloring in each of the cards and kind of call forth different gemstones. I think most beautiful for me and for many of us is what he does with cards like the Hermit, where he has this kind of labradorite patterning in the background. It's just gorgeous. It's a delight to play with. And I got this first edition in two finishes. This, I think, is the standard smooth. My preferred version of this first edition is, let's see, can you see that? Is the Make Playing Cards linen. Is that showing up? There you go. Which I just love. So it's the same, this is the same first edition of the deck, but in a linen finish. Love it. This is, when I'm using the first edition of the deck, this is the one I use. This is actually, this one is on my altar. So that was the first edition of the CS Tarot. He also then came out with a second edition where the backs are reversible. So the difference between this sigil centered on the back and this back is, obviously this one is not reversible. Now I'm not such a stickler for reversible or not reversible backing. It doesn't really affect how I read with tarot. I think I probably prefer the original backing, but I love the second edition backing too. And I think he made some very minor adjustments to the cards. This again is the, I think this is the standard smooth, or is it the superior smooth? It might be the superior smooth. I love this black background, but I also really, really love, I think this is my favorite color for this deck, the deep amber, the orange backing. And this again is the linen. This is my favorite version of this deck. Maybe, well, actually, as I say that, I think, is it this one? Or is it? Yes, I own 5 CS Tarots. It might be this one, which I've featured before as like my favorite version of the Pamela Coleman Smith ever. Again, the coloration is gorgeous. There's that labradorite Hermit. This is in that make playing cards plastic cardstock. And it's really, you have to hold this in your hands to appreciate it. The linen is fabulous. Let me see if I can get the two together. The linen is fabulous, but there's something about the plastic. It's got heft to it. It's got substance to it, but it's incredibly flexible. So you feel like you're holding something that's premium cardstock, right? Because it's got such weight and heft, and yet it's that smooth, plastic, bendy, indestructible cardstock that is just chef's kiss, right? So I think this is my favorite CS Tarot, although this is the linen version of the second edition is a close second. So there's the CS Tarot. But it doesn't stop there, folks, because, you know, he did other versions of the Coleman Smith artwork. This is, I think he calls this the Old Pam. This is his kind of vintage, slightly desaturated version of the deck. And I like this too. This again is the plastic copy. I have taken this to conferences and conventions. I've taken this to when my husband, who's a book dealer, antiquarian and rare book dealer and appraiser, when we've gone to book fairs, I've taken this edition because it feels old. And I've really enjoyed reading with it, and have felt very, have felt like among bibliophiles and people who like old things, this one really stands out. Another one of his Pam decks that has that kind of vintage feel, this is his original, what's this called? This is his kind of take on the original tarot, the original Rider-Waite with the Rider edition that comes out with the lilies and roses background. And he modeled this after his own personal deck, beat to shit, beat up, vintage. I got this in the thick cardstock, which is chunky. It's a chunky monkey deck. I enjoy using this deck a lot too. I think if I had to purchase it over again, I think I would get it in the format that he sells it in now, which is not the thick cardstock anymore, but the standard smooth, I think is what he sells it in. I love the sort of pre-used, this old beat to hell sense of the deck. I also picked up, let's see, what else is there? Oh, the Hermit's Hybrid. So this is the deck that he made for Simon at the Hermit's Cave, which is a hybrid edition of a playing card deck and a tarot deck, and it has the Coleman Smith artwork inset into the courts and the majors, but then gives us, and with the aces as well, but then gives us regular pips from a playing card. But they're old-fashioned feeling pips, or they're sort of custom feeling pips. The backings are quite lovely. They're sort of like the backings of the old Pam, right? That, but with the inset of the playing card suits. I got this again in the linen, which is really lovely. I haven't read with this that much. It's a cool hybrid deck. Actually, I should read with it more. It's a very cool hybrid deck. So that's the Hermit's Hybrid. And then to round out my Coleman Smith artwork, I have, and this one in my left hand is probably my favorite Waite Smith deck at the moment. But this is the Pam B. Okay, it's Conrad's restoration of a Pam B. Now, I actually am lucky enough to own a Pam B. It's not in this kind of pristine quality of this version. This is a version that I can play with. I haven't ever read with the Pam B, at least with this restored Pam B. But what I love about the Pam B and why I wanted to own it of the restoration decks that Conrad has done is because of the particular quality of childlikeness that we see in the faces in this deck. The way that we get, let me see a good example if I can find the easily, like the High Priestess, she's got real rosy cheeks, you know? And this Fool, just, can you, let me just, if you compare this Fool to the Fool we know and love, just see how his face is kind of rounder and more youthful. Let's see if I can get, here we go. So this is the Fool in the Pam A here. And this is the Fool of the Pam B. Now the colors are different, but what I love, so this is a more orangey palette in the Pam B, at least in Conrad's version of it. But what I love is just how sort of more youthful the Fool is in the Pam B. Do you all see that? I can't really describe that well. The Pam B was, you know, kind of a retraced, we think, a retracing of Pamela Coleman Smith's original artwork. And so some of the cards just feel, the line work feels chunkier or clunkier. So that Pam B I love, but I think, again, it's the Pam A, which I got in a linen backing, a linen finish, and it's just to die for. It's so fun to read with this deck. Can you see the linen finish? Do you even need to see it? Probably not, because you guys are familiar with this deck. Is this even it? No. Yes, this is. Or is this, nope, that's the Pam B. Ha ha. That's the Pam B Fool. This is the Pam A Fool. So this deck, I just did a reading for someone just about a half hour ago with this deck. It is the deck that I now am using in all of my readings. Even though I have a whole bunch of vintage decks, I use Conrad Steyn's Restored Pam A these days as my number one Waite-Smith deck. Okay, so those are all the Pams that I have, all the various versions of the Waite-Smith deck that I have. The other decks of Conrad's that I have that I love, let's start with the Aquarian Tarot. This is his vintage Aquarian Tarot in the large format. And I first got this deck. It's quite browned and vintage. It's quite lovely. I first got this deck with the intention of this being my number one Aquarian Tarot to use. And some of you know this already. I use the Aquarian Tarot for my readings that I read on behalf of my dog, Opal. So my animal communication deck is the Aquarian Tarot. The Aquarian Tarot is Opal's deck. Ooh, and that's Opal barking in the background. That's so funny. But there's something about the larger format here. I just don't reach for it as much. So the Aquarian Tarot that I use the most when I'm reading for Opal is the Aquarian Tarot that I use the most when I'm reading for Opal is this little version of the deck, which is about the size, I think he calls it his US Games size, and it's about the size, I think it's exactly the same size, in fact, as the Tarot in a Tin version of the Aquarian Tarot. And the vintaging is slightly lighter in this newer edition. Now, if I could achieve anything, it would be that if I could bend Conrad to my will, it would be that he would make a version in between these two sizes. I'm not such a fan of mini decks. They're cute and all, but I don't really love reading with them. Although being able to throw this in my purse and go has been lovely and something that I do on a regular basis. The last two decks of Conrad's that I own, one is his version, his vintage version of the 1JJ Swiss classic deck. I love his version of it. Again, I'm a big fan of the clarity and precision of his restorations, and I love what he does with vintage decks. This one is a little bit lighter than his original version of the Aquarian, which is a little bit maybe heavy-handed in its browning. This one is a little bit lighter. And I think it just beautifully mutes the primary colors of this deck, but brings forth all the quirkiness, all the fabulous line work and detail. You know, this is like the Aquarian Tarot, like the Pam. These are decks that I actually, you know, I own the vintage versions, but what I reach for are Conrad's versions of the deck. And finally, and this is the Arnaud, a vintage Marseille. It's a vintage Marseille, and then this is Conrad's sort of desaturated version of it, slightly desaturated. And I got this also in the Make Playing Cards plastic, that wonderful plastic cardstock. It has the version of the crackleback from his CS Tarot, but in a palette that matches the muted tones. I love this deck. It's a Marseille deck that, again, I've taken with me on the road, especially for book fairs and conventions, because it has that kind of old school feel, and it's indestructible. So great for travel. Okay, it's getting noisy in my neighborhood. They're doing road work. So between the dogs barking and the road work, I think it's time to go. But there you go. This is my Conrad Steyn collection. Snag what you can on Make Playing Cards today. Thank y'all. Thanks for your practice.